and answering those for people that do have those questions. So there's a number of things. So I can just put them out there, and then if you can address them, possibly, we really appreciate it. Are we providing receipts for provisional ballots? Is one of the questions. Registration application tracking. How are they tracking their ballot or their applications as well as their ballots? Will they get a confirmation of their registration as well as a ballot? How are you getting information to the public? Like, what is the plan? How are you advertising? Are you giving it lead time so that voters are prepared and have a plan to include the dates and the deadlines? I know Freda mentioned the newspaper. If that's the only location that folks can get information, that's going to limit where and when and how they're going to be informed. So I would advise multiple ways to reach communities, especially those who may need the most aid as far as literacy and just being aware of the information they need to make their plan. I noticed there's a new voter registration application that has a predominant mail ballot in the top title. I wasn't expecting that, so I didn't know if that was like, since that was the only one I saw, then I thought that was the new transition to how they apply. I was really uninformed about that. Do we have enough poll workers, and where are you advertising to do that? I did go to the Lincoln Library, which was the only place that was advertised on anywhere. I found it on Facebook. I know that there were like tabling opportunities to recruit polling workers and voter registration applications available at various libraries, but I didn't find any place where it was advertised on the election board website or Erie County website. It was just by chance that you may have seen that. I know it was announced last meeting on August the 11th, but there was no advertisement for any of those tabling events. Also, like voter identification for first-time voters, what is acceptable? Like, besides the PennDOT ID, Pennsylvania's driver license, and a social security number, there are other methods that folks that may not have access to those can have a non-photo ID available if they are informed and informed
Margaret,
early enough.
I'm sorry.
That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else from the public to be heard today? Anyone from the public who wishes to be heard? Last call, anyone from the public who wishes to be heard? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and I will entertain a motion for approval of minutes. Well, no, I take that back. This is another one of those, isn't it?
Yeah, there's none.
Yeah, there is none from the previous meeting. So-
Madam Chairman, may I interrupt you real quick? I see Councilman Horton has joined us as well, just to make sure we know Councilman Horton is on.
Okay. Andre, I see you there. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. We're moving on. We just got down to approval of minutes. There are none. We're going to move on to the next item, to items for consideration. And I don't know, Ms. Slomsky, do we want to have a review of these one by one?
Yes. So what we have, this is our Act 88, our county election integrity compliance report. So basically, part of the funding that we receive, we have to do a compliance report. It is due tomorrow, and it's something that Tanya has been spending quite a bit of time on to make sure we're in compliance. So Tanya is going to review each and every item of which, do basically the checklist they have to kind of illustrate what we've done so far. Tanya.
Okay, thank you. And please just bear with me, but I think this will be informative. So for number one, the approval of voter registration applications. Upon receiving applications into our office, they are time-stamped and initialed by staff. At that time, we examine each application to determine whether the application is complete, whether the applicant is qualified, and whether the applicant has an existing registration record. We also search the SHORE system to see if the applicant is registered in another county in Pennsylvania. In that case, we request to have the voter canceled and transferred to Erie County. Number two, cancellation of deceased electors. We receive death notifications from the Department of Health. We utilize published newspaper obituaries. The letters of testament issued by the Register of Wills. These voters found to have deceased are promptly removed from our voting rolls. The newly adopted procedure of cross-referencing death records with the Clerk of Records office has been highly effective. We have been able to identify and cancel voter records for individuals that were not reported through the Department of Health. Number three, voter removal programs. Every year, our office sends mass mailings to voters whose address may have changed. This year, we sent the following: 2,419 notices to voters who may have moved to a different address within Erie County, 255 notices to voters who may have moved to another county in Pennsylvania, and 1,225 notices to voters who may have moved out of state. As a result, we were informed of 430 permanent moves out of state. Those voter records have been canceled. 22 voters were transferred to another county in Pennsylvania, and 273 voters changed their address and have been assigned to a new voting precinct within Erie County. Number four, safekeeping of voted ballots. All ballots received are kept in a ballot cage, which is locked at the end of each working day. The ballot cage remains locked and under the new cameras until the next working day. We will continue safeguarding all ballots through the canvassing process. Number five, enforcing the voter identification provisions. Upon the receipt of any mail-in ballot application of a qualified elector, our office verifies the proof of identification by comparing the information provided on the application with the information contained on the applicant's permanent registration. In the event an application is not approved, the voter is notified immediately with a statement by the board of the reasons for the disapproval. If the applicant's proof of identity was not provided with the application or could not be verified, we send a notice to the elector with the mail-in ballot, requiring the elector to provide proof of their identification with the mail-in ballot, or the ballot will not be counted. Number six, pre-canvassing and canvassing of absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. As I've mentioned earlier, ballots received by our office are kept secure until canvassing. Watchers are permitted to be present when ballots are opened and counted and recorded. Whenever an elector who has returned their ballot has deceased, we mark their envelope as deceased. The ballot will then be rejected during the canvassing process. Our canvassing team will meet no later than 7:00 a.m. on election day to pre-canvass all ballots received prior to the meeting. We will begin canvassing all ballots not included in the pre-canvass or received on election day by 8 p.m. And we will continue canvassing until all mail-in and absentee ballots have been canvassed. For those whose identification have not been verified prior to election day, those ballots will be set aside for 6 calendar days after the election. Electors who return their verification letters and satisfy the requirements, those ballots will be counted along with military ballots on the 7th day following the election. For those who fail to provide proof of identity, those ballots shall not be counted.
And one thing I want to add to that, and I was discussed with a few of you on the Board of Elections, is making sure we're removing those deceased voters. and making sure everything's all set there. So as Tanya mentioned, I want to thank our chief of clerk of records, Aubrey Haggerty Haynes, at her office. We've been working very diligently with them to make sure, going even through a manual double check process, to make sure if for some reason there was someone that was missed on that list, we are removing them. So I'm very thankful for Tanya and the team to take the time. But you know, our clerk of records, Aubrey Haggerty Haynes, in her office has been very helpful. So I want to mention that as one new step that we've taken since our conversations in the primary.
Very good. That was an exhaustive list. And are there any questions on this one? I think I'd like to do it one by one. I know we went all
Okay.
the way through them the last time. I think that got a little bit confusing, but any questions or comments from members of the board? Okay.
Good job.
Yeah, it's,
Thanks,
I mean,
Tanya.
it really is a testimony to the diligence of Tanya and all of her staff, and really the army of people that we have working throughout Erie County. It's an amazing process. Anyone who needs a lesson in civics, needs to go around and get a picture of what it's like out there at the polling places and in-house as well. Act 88 compliance, we need a
We do not. We just, since we have voted on it numerous times, including the ratification in our county council meeting, it's just a simple signage of the form.
all right.
And Councilman Horton and Councilman Bale, with your permission, we will have Jill stamp your signatures on there. Would that be okay?
So we'll be signing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. And I'll pass that over along at the
Signing
end.
it, but no vote on it since we already did.
Yep.
Okay. All right, then we can move on to ballot approval. Do you have any comments or anything you'd like to say about
Well,
that?
As ever, thanks to Megan, have emailing everyone yesterday, so you have time to review your ballots in addition to right here. Tanya, again, and the team took extreme diligence to make sure every race, every precinct was in sync. And of course, with our House districts that we have, with the redistricting, made sure, again, following the primary, everything was correct. So I will say there's been, like I said, extra diligence on this one, including Megan and myself doing one review after another. But thanks to Tanya and Angela Watson for all of their efforts in making sure this is correct.
No, I was looking over it last night.
We know how to have a fun Thursday night.
Right. Was Megan's suggestion, have some fun last night?
Any questions or comments from the board? All right, I will entertain a motion then for ballot approval certification.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Chairman Shank and Councilwoman Showerman. Roll call.
Mr. Horton,
Yes,
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Scatella,
Yes.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Bale,
Yes,
and Chairwoman Rennie.
Yes. Thank you. And moving on to the next item on the agenda, we do have 3 full location changes, as has been discussed. I know it's difficult to find places that are accessible, that have all of the amenities that we require and so forth. Would you like to make any comments?
I would, before our custodian reviews everything with us, I want to thank, Councilman Scatella for bringing this to our attention of the changes that needed to be made. We're lucky to have a custodian like Jim, who's not only in charge of our machines, but securing our locations. And he really spent a decent amount of time, in the primary after we made this decision. Even on primary day, he said to me, Julie, we need to have signs so that when people go to vote, they know their precinct is going to change. And thanks to Jim, we have the signs there. I personally talked to the judge of elections in those precincts as well to make sure they understood. We don't know where we're going to be moving you, but there's going to be a change. I have, personal stake in this because my precinct is changing, Mill Creek 18. And I'm thankful that Jim figured out what would be the closest precinct within reason to transfer, to have us transfer to. And it's, appealing to all of us that we could even walk there. And it is easily accessed through public transportation as well. So I'll let Jim take the mic from here, but I want to thank Jim publicly over and over for all of his efforts. This was quite a task and he achieved it perfectly. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you. I want to say that the old site will be posted on election day, so if anybody goes to the old building, it'll have instructions on the new site, so there won't be any confusion there. I did call a lot of places, so I did turn over every rock and leaf, so to speak, looking for an optimal location. I feel these are the best options we have, and I'm real grateful for the Erie Community College. It's a perfect location. New Hope Presbyterian. It's a good location, not too far from the previous site, J.S. Wilson. I think it's traffic flow, the traffic pattern. It's a good location for that. First Alliance, they voted at McDowell past elections. Before that, they voted at Lancaster School, Grandview Elementary on Lancaster Road. So it's not too far from those previous locations. I don't think it'll cause any hardship getting there. That's all.
And I think everyone has a list, right?
Mhm.
We have okay. Are there any questions or comments from board members?
Madam Chair, could I comment why this was requested?
Sure.
I met with the superintendent, and actually the concern is having this voting places at schools. Times have changed, and what happened is they have to adjust the schedule. What they usually do is go virtual. You know how parents and students, so some adjust to that, some don't. He just thought it's a safety issue. Get them out of the schools if you could do that. And to thank this office for what they, because I think I talked to Julia the next day, and they were starting to work on it that day. They succeeded.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Shank?
Maybe we can ask our friends at the Erie Times, since AJ is sitting here, to make a little blurb about that, please, and thank you. Yeah, okay. Since he's sitting there.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right, seeing none, we'll entertain a motion. We're going to vote on these all as one unless the board would like to separate them out. Otherwise, we'll do it. I'll entertain a motion to approve the location changes as one vote.
I'll make a motion to, as one vote.
Second. Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second from Mr. Scatella. Roll call.
This is for one vote,
That's
correct?
for one. Yes, it's not an amendment. It's the
One vote. Okay. Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Scatella,
Yes,
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Bale,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
and Chairwoman Rennie.
yes. Thank you. Thank you Jen, for all of the work. I know this is a big job, and it can be kind of thankless, but we do appreciate it. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is the plan for constables.
Well, we want to make sure we have a vote for polling changes now. So we combined it as one, and now we're going to vote.
Oh, okay, I assumed that an amendment would fracture them out.
Just to make sure we have it all clear, but do you
All
want me to read the changes or just read the polling precincts?
I would read the polling
Okay,
precincts.
all right. Okay, and this is the approval to move the polling precincts for Mill Creek 13 from Tracy Elementary School, 2624 West 6th to Erie County Community College of Pennsylvania, 2403 West 8th Street. Mill Creek 18 from J.S. Wilson Middle School Auditorium, 900 West 54th Street to New Hope Presbyterian Church, 5440 Washington Avenue. This is combining the precinct with Mill Creek 12. Mill Creek 22 will move from McDowell Intermediate High School, 3320 Cohee to First Alliance Church Gym, 2939 Zimmerly Road, joining with Mill Creek 23.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Showerman and Mr. Shank. Roll call vote.
Mr. Scatella,
Yes,
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Bale,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
and Chairman Rennie.
Yes. Thank you.
Mhm.
Right, we'll move on to the next item, which is the constable plan.
And as we had discussed previously, this was brought to my attention by the Constables Association that we needed to make sure we had, constables working in our precincts and not advising them they could not like I did. So again, I apologize for that misunderstanding. So I'm happy to say for the first time since 2019, we're going to have constables in the polls. What we're going to be doing is making sure, is every precinct going to be covered? No, it depends on if we have an elected or appointed constable in that precinct. And that goes through, of course, the Erie County Court Administration. They have their approved constable list, and it's working with the constables there. So what we have is, I'd say it's almost a good quarter of our precincts that could be covered, up to half if possible. But there's a challenge there. Like, for example, Constable Kudlak, he covers all of Mill Creek, and that's 25 precincts. So a discussion I had with Constable Kudlak was, how we would prioritize precincts and what have you. And that was a concern for several other constables covering the various city wards, and it was Mill Creek in particular. So we will work through that. But the most important thing is each judge of elections will have the cell phone number for their constable to call, of course, in the event of a concern, emergency. But the constables will constantly, be rotating through their precincts for those that have multiple precincts. So we just went through all of, their duties in terms of working with the judge of elections. And then the specifics, they are able to wear a uniform or be in plain clothes. They may carry his or her firearm, and that we have everything, the process laid out. So I want to thank our local constables for their feedback. I want to thank the Constables Association for guiding me through this process. And I really feel we're going to, again, safety and obviously a professional polling site is always important. I really think we're going to make sure we have that this time around. And I did make a note on the bottom of this that I'll be working with the Erie County Sheriff's Office like I do, every election cycle. And they'll of course be in touch with having the phone numbers for the constables as well. And the constables, will be the ones in charge of being the peacekeeper, but know if they need additional resources, they are available. Are there any questions with that from that perspective? You've had a chance to kind of read over this policy.
Any questions, comments from the board? I actually don't have any.
Okay.
Comments or questions about it as well. I think it's played out.
It's also-
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Horton?
Yeah, I think I see our solicitor joined us. I'm not sure if he's waving at us or trying to get your attention or what, if his audio's working. But I would think that he would have some comments on constable. Although I'm not sure what he's doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Horton. I am trying to get into this. I'm having some issues with my iPad. There is a long history with the constables. And there have been, there was a decision years ago not to use them anymore. And the reason was that there were too few of them. Well, there were a couple of reasons. Using constables at the poll sites made sense when we had a small population and there were some, constables that could cover the various polling districts. But obviously we have so many precincts that, and way too few constables that, it just didn't make sense to provide some precincts with constables and not the others. The other issue is that, the election board did not want badges and any kind of police or authority hanging out at polls, believing that it could intimidate some of the voters. And so they really fell in disfavor over the years, and the election board decided to eliminate that. So for, the other thing is the cost. The election board considered the cost as well and decided to eliminate constables. So that is that's the history behind it. And I can't remember how long ago that was that the election board decided to do that. But for those various reasons, it eliminated it. Now I hear that I was not consulted on this particular issue, so I'm just getting it now. But in keeping with the election code, I don't believe that anybody that has a badge or a gun should be showing up and monitoring things at election districts or polling districts. If there's an issue of, and this has happened more recently, even in the during the Clinton re-elections, where we just simply called the constables and they would come to the polling site. So it made more sense to make sure that they were available on election day, but not to employ them at polling districts.
Tom, I guess my question would be, I'm not aware of any such ordinance or resolution to eliminate the constables. I know that we hadn't had them at different elections, but it's my understanding that because of an agreement that, I don't know if it's statewide, but that we are compelled to use the constables and they are entitled to pay. I don't see any reason why we would pay them, but yet not use them.
Right. This is a discussion we've had multiple times, including post-primary and with you as well, Solicitor Tallarico. The pay is $155 per day. They had to be paid the same amount as someone working in the polls, not a judge, because obviously they're paid more, but a machine operator, our clerks, our inspectors, they're paid at that rate.
Madam Chair. Once again, Julie, I have never been consulted on this issue. I have no idea what they make, and what they make is kind of besides the point. Madam Chair, there is absolutely no state law that compels a county board of elections to use any kind of officer, let alone the constables at polling districts. If that were the case, then they would never have been eliminated. So the County Board of Elections is free to want to employ them or not. There is the overriding interest. We went through this with when we had the 2020 election about the issue of having police having police or citizens with guns near the polling districts, near the precincts. And we handled that without a problem. There were no constables during that election unless we needed them or asked them to, to appear. Now, obviously the election board, if they want to, could employ them again. But I think it's contrary to the spirit of the elections to have badges and guns near the precincts. There's only there are very few constables. They could never cover all of the precincts, not even 1/10 of the precincts. So, I mean, it's up to the election board, but it is not against state law.
All right, I'd like to recognize Councilman Bale had his hand up. Did he take his down?
I'm here. I think we've heard, and again this morning, how people that we trust to work at these locations have a concern for safety. We know from a law enforcement perspective that it's always better to be proactive than reactive. So I would say I'm I'm in favor of whatever we can do to, improve the aspect of safety at our polling locations to make our workers feel safer. And, police can't be everywhere all the time out in the regular world, but the thought of them being around and the possibility of them being there is officer presence is the first step in the, force continuum. It does a lot of good just to the perception that they could be there or they're around. So even if they can't cover all of them, I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, Councilman Bale. Councilman Horton?
Well, that prompted another question or comment. My colleague's comments. My hand was raised though to ask if any liability issues should something happen and constable do something unduly or.
Believe the constables are licensed.
Know that, and so are police officers, again. And then we have liability with our sheriffs and everywhere else. So I don't know if there's liability or not. That's the first thing. And the second thing is perception. And I think and I get the need, particularly in this dispensation we find ourselves in, with all the negative, a lot of negative energy floating around elections. I get it, but perception. Everyone doesn't have the same perception of law enforcement or badge or uniform. You can put a badge or uniform in one place and they receive great. You can put one in another place and it invokes fear or distrust. And I think, and I've heard this way before the solicitor, but I think the spirit of the election, as far as uniforms around, is a valid point. I do know that we can't cover, or that law enforcement can't cover every precinct or be everywhere at every time. I'm not aware of many incidents that we've had during my tenure. We've had some. But if a constable's in one part of the county and we're calling them to respond, it may be the response time may be an issue in, all in itself. And so if we're gonna have to call somebody on an as needed basis, that kind of, why would we pay a whole compliment? Why wouldn't we just call somebody on an as needed basis? Why wouldn't we just send a sheriff? And then there are jurisdictions that do have law enforcement, and we've called them in the past as well. So that's just my comment.
Are there any other members? Councilman Shank?
Yes, thank you. Ms. O'Neill, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for your input. And this kind of like brings it full circle
I
of
understand.
what you said about making sure that the polling sites are safe. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to create a police presence. We're not trying to say anything negative, and again, Mr. Bale took like half my speech, what I had planned out about the first line of defense is actually knowing you're walking into a safe place. I'm sorry that some people perceive law enforcement, that uniform and badge in a negative manner. That's not the intent, and it's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make sure when, Joe Q. Citizen and our workers walk into a polling place, they see that uniform, they see a person keeping an eye on everything. Trust me, that is a huge statement that we're here for you. We're trying to make this safe for everybody and not just, a polling place that has one or doesn't have one. I understand we can't be everywhere at all times. That's why we have the sheriff's department. We had an issue last year. Well, the sheriff showed up, the police showed up, it was taken care of, no problem. So I will support this because integrity of our polling sites, our staff, and Joe Q citizen is priority one. And then the integrity of the voting is second in my book. But we can replace paper, we can replace machines, but we can't replace the people that of our communities and the people that have decided to step up and work in a polling, be a judge, be a machine operator. So that's my speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members?
I'll just say, you all know that I was judge of elections for over 20 years. And at the time that we stopped having the constables was at a time when someone was deemed a constable for polling sites since there weren't enough constables to be at every polling site, the constable from that area would pick people, just random people, usually relatives, and call them a constable for every polling site. And they were paid at the going rates of that time. But the people that were put in as constable were not trained, they weren't licensed, and in many instances were either quite elderly or very disinterested in the whole process. I know we had a constable at my district where I was judge, where he went over and laid on the floor and we had to keep waking him up. So that started the process of getting rid of them. But those constables were not licensed and it wasn't a job that they did. So we stopped that. These people that we're going to have now are licensed constables, and they are performing a duty that they're trained for. And they won't be in every precinct, but they will be available if issues arise and we need them. Thank you.
Thank you. A comment. I will say a couple words.
Chair, I still have my hand up.
I'm sorry, I thought you had finished.
Just comment, or I can comment after you. I'm not trying to cut you off.
No, go ahead, Andre. I was just going to wrap it up. Do you have other words?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Again, I asked about liability, even with him being licensed. And I haven't heard an answer to that. So it seems that he hasn't looked at it. And the other comment that I would have in regards to constables is it contrary, does it run contrary to election law? You may have sent me some stuff telling me exactly what their responsibilities will be on election day, but I don't have that accessible to me. But the election law clearly states that there should not be, states those instances of reason and or reasons why there should not be a uniformed person at the election site. I don't know the answer. I'm asking, does that run contrary to the law? Are they going to be actually in the building? Because I wouldn't like that. Or are they going to be in the area? Will they be required to stay so many feet away as other entities and law enforcement officers are? Do we have those questions answered?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Talarico, thank you.
Yeah, but just like any police officer, they will have to stay at least 10 feet away from the polling site.
Well, I believe they are permitted to come through, and there are, as I understand it, regulations that govern the Association of Pennsylvania State Constables. Well, I don't know if I said that right, Pennsylvania State Constables Association. Do you want to make comment on that, Ms.
I mean,
Slonsky?
they are allowed, in the polls, and we did go over all the specified reasons previously. I mean, they are the peacekeeping officer, working with, of course, local law enforcement in case there is an issue. But there is nowhere where they're saying they are not allowed in the polls. They are working.
Madam Chair, excuse me, that's absolutely absurd. police officers have to stay at least 10 feet away. Constables who are not even police officers are going to have to stay 10 feet away as well.
No,
We're talking
only
about,
thing- Sorry,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
no. Hey, if someone's getting beat up inside, of course they're allowed in, but that's not the point. In fact, we didn't have any incidents during 2020 without the constables. So being defensive and overprotective of the polling workers, as opposed to the freedom of voting and enfranchising the voter, we should turn a polling site into a compound, a government compound. It's a free country and a free vote. The law concerning constables, the constables were just used at election sites because the legislature permitted it way back in the day when there was a concern and a more conservative country existed and there were few polling places. We've passed that 70 years ago, if not longer. And I can't recall any incidents, any physical incidents for as long as I've been the solicitor at any of these polling sites. And why we would decide now to protect the poll workers is beyond me. We don't have any incidents. As far as people being intimidated by a badge and a gun, that is automatic. Everybody is. Now, if you're within, if you know better, and if you are part of, and if you're a constable or police officer, of course you're not. But we want everybody in this country to be just a little bit intimidated so that they know what the law is and they know what their boundaries are. But we don't need that at a polling site. And previous election boards made that pretty darn clear.
Thank you for your input. I am not aware of any resolution eliminating the constables.
It doesn't matter. They were eliminated without a resolution. A lot of past, if you look at the retirement board, council, all
Without
of
any
these,
formal action, right?
all of these entities even now, we don't always fit every decision that the board makes into a resolution.
All right, excuse me, I'm going to give the floor to Councilwoman Showerman.
I just sat here and pulled this up on my phone. It's from the Pennsylvania Department of State, and it's dated October of 2016. And it's titled Guidance on Rules in Effect at the Polling Place on Election Day. And the next subtitle is Persons Explicitly Permitted in the Polling Place. And there's 6 of them. 1 is the precinct election officials. 2 are the voters in process of voting. 3, persons lawfully providing assistance to voters. 4, poll watchers. 5, overseers. And 6 are constables and deputy constables for the purpose of preserving the peace. Other officials may be summoned by the local election officials as needed.
And I would like to say a few words now, if I may. I believe everyone's had a pretty good chance to express their opinion. I sat in on that 2020 series of meetings because we were so concerned about security. And frankly, to say that there has been no incidents of violence up to this point is not good enough. We've seen that there can be violence, such as the violence that we saw on January 6th. Call it partisan, call it what you will. There can be a threat of violence. If someone from the public who is voting can walk in with a gun on their hip, I find no compelling reason why someone in law enforcement can't make a pass through. And we're not talking about a compound, we're talking about a pass through, checking in with the judge of elections, making their presence known, and then moving on if there is no problem. I was out at one of the precincts last year, I think, and we did have occasion to have someone removed from the polling place. And by the time we had a sheriff's deputy, and by the time the Mill Creek police showed up, And thankfully, there was no real credible threat of violence there, but it was a disturbance nonetheless. And it takes time to get people out to those various precincts. And I'm not saying that this would eliminate all threats of violence, not saying that, no one can guarantee that. But one more piece of security, especially one that has been, I guess, vetted over time in the state of Pennsylvania and has been cleaned up, so to speak. I'm going to go in favor of it. And just one more thing, because I see Councilman Showerman has something to add to
Yes,
that.
because there is a section on page 2 that discusses police officers and other peace officers. And this is referring to actual police. And it says that police officers are not permitted in the polling place. Uniformed or plainclothes police officers must remain 100 feet or more from the entrance of a polling place. And the exceptions to this rule are when something goes wrong or when a police officer is voting. So they differentiate between constables and deputy constables above for being allowed in there. But then they say that uniformed officers, the last one, can be considered intimidating. So they don't discourage.
And this is one of the things that we did consider quite extensively when we made our resolution from October 2020, to reaffirm that armed police officers, just like any other groups of people carrying guns, had to stay a certain distance from any polling place. And, as I said, the spirit of this is just to allow reasonable monitoring by the constables who are licensed, and it is allowable within Pennsylvania. So I am going to be voting in favor of it. I think we've been over and over this so many times. And the questions that I've asked as far as why we dropped it have never been met with any sort of reasonable answers. And I did ask the previous clerk, and it was just like, that's really the answer that I got. We don't talk about it. So I think it was a very hush hush thing that was done years ago. And from everything that I've been able to ascertain, I will be voting in favor of this plan.
Madam Chair, that's fine that everyone's going to vote that way. I don't have an issue with that, but it was never handled in a hush hush situation. I was there, and it was spoken at on a couple occasions at the meetings. There was no hush hush. What he probably meant by that is that the constables didn't like it. That's all. And we had a number of issues similar to what Ms. Showerman alluded to, as far as a number of deputies which the constables hired that were not fit to carry a gun. And many of them didn't show up, and it became a mess. Now, maybe magically the constables have cleaned up their act. I don't know. But to minimize or diminish the reasons for deciding to eliminate constables, it was well thought out. Now, if this council or board rather is more concerned about the safety, given the news that we hear on a daily basis, well, then that's a good reason enough to want to employ them. From a procedural point of view, though, the election board should know how many precincts there are, how many directors there are, how many constables there are, how many deputies that they need or want or intend to retain, and what the background and qualifications of those people are, whether they really know how to use a gun. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further?
Yes, my chat's disabled. I was just gonna put it in the chat because I think we've had extensive conversation about it. My comment is on the deputization. How does that work? And I hope that that's not a part of this, or that that's spelled out, and that a constable won't just be able to go pick a relative or even a friend.
There is no deputization.
So they-
Okay, so can we, yeah, so I think that should be clarified, right here, right now.
It
Only because it's been talked about.
Yeah, and Councilman Horton, I apologize. It was my understanding you were coming in person and we have it sitting right here at your desk, but we'll make sure to get that to you. But this constable, as I read over earlier, has to be on the Erie County Court Administration authorized constable list. And working with Bob Cataldi's office with that to make sure they are certified, they are firearms certified. So there are no deputy constables, and that was feedback from the Constables Association and from our current constables that said, we don't want any deputies because of that situation like we talked about, the individual falling asleep or someone that is just not trained to be there. And several constables said to me, if you are going to bring in deputies, I'm not comfortable doing this because I don't believe they are trained or qualified. And I respect them for saying that.
Is that list of paperwork that I didn't retrieve contain a list of those constables in what areas?
It does not, because we're waiting on another updated list. We technically received a list yesterday we thought was updated, and she informed me there were still some that were missing. So we have about 19 constables. We're waiting to hear back from 2 more to see if they are certified now, was their concern. And we are covering roughly about a quarter of our precincts. It could lead to more, but again, as I mentioned earlier, a great example is Constable Kudlak from Mill Creek. He covers 25 precincts. Obviously, he can't be at all 25, but he's going to do his best to rotate and be in communication with the judge of elections. So that's an example where the number is inflated a bit. I would hate to say, oh, we're covering half, because obviously Mr. Kudlak can't be at 25 precincts. But he did speak with a constable of the 5th Ward, Todd Treschel, who said if there's a situation maybe at Val Valley 1 or 21, he'd be able to help out Constable Kudlak, since he'll be focused in that area there of the 5th Ward.
Yeah, we should really get that list
We'll have it.
of who is, because I know some really super guys that are constables, and I know some not so super guys that are constables as well.
Yes, we have
Madam Chair.
a list, but it's not accurate, so I don't want to do that until we have an accurate list. But prior to Election Day, we will have an accurate list of which constables are their certifications. Are they firearms certified? Are they fully certified, through the constables organization? But we will make sure they are, up to par.
Mr. Tellerico.
Yes, there is a procedure for a constable to deputize another person. They have to go to court, and the court has to approve it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. If I think that concludes the discussion. At this time, I will entertain. So moved. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the constable plan as presented. Roll call vote.
Mr. Shank,
Yes.
Mr. Bale,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
No,
Mrs. Showerman,
Yes.
Mr. Scatella,
Yes.
and Chairwoman Rennie.
Yes. Thank you. I want to move on to the next item, which is general questions and comments from the board. Anything? Yes, Mr. Shank.
Thank you. I yield back.
That's it?
It's great work, everybody.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments from the board?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Tallarico?
the board knows that I entered an appearance in the case filed by the Republican National Committee against the Secretary of the Commonwealth and the several boards of election across the Commonwealth. What the lawsuit is about is there are a number, perhaps I would say around 15 counties that are currently permitting notice to cure procedures. And the Republican National Committee it argues that those are illegal under the election code and they seek a judgment or an injunction to stop all election boards from doing that. Now, a notice to cure procedure would be when a mail-in ballot comes in and the election board determines that it's defective. In Erie County, that's the end of the story. The mail-in ballot is rejected, it's placed in the pile, and that voter, that vote does not count. There are a number of jurisdictions throughout the Commonwealth. Obviously, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, the Scranton area, Allentown, and a number of centralized or more central counties that have different procedures in place, where if a ballot comes in and say it's missing a date or a signature, they call the voter, advise them that their ballot is defective, that it's going to be rejected, that their vote's not going to count unless they come into the office and sign it or date it or cure the defect on the outside of the envelope, or they will be told it's rejected and that if you intend to vote, to go to the precinct, to the polling district and vote provisionally.
Thank
I
you. Oh, go ahead.
I represented to the court, and that's now going on, that the Erie County Election Board does not have a cure procedure. I would recommend that the Board of Elections adopt a cure procedure. Otherwise, they're disenfranchising mail-in voters who would otherwise, whose vote would otherwise count if they went to the polling place. We shouldn't discriminate, or the board should not discriminate against defective ballots that come in because a lot of these defects could easily be cured. But because of the technicality, they're not being counted. It amounts to a disenfranchisement. And I would recommend that the board adopt a procedure where they notify, where if they, once they determine they have a defective ballot, that they call the voter, advise them that it's defective, give them the option of coming in, of course, not later than 8 o'clock on election day, to correct it, or tell them it's being rejected. And if you want your vote to count, you have to go to the polling place and vote provisionally.
Thank you, Mr. Talarico. One of the attachments with the board packet today was a letter or an email from you with an example for notice to cure letter from Allegheny County, and then the procedure used by the Lehigh County Board of Elections. I appreciate your input. That is under consideration. We're allowing the board to absorb that a bit. We will be having another meeting before the election with the intent to make a vote on such a resolution. So I appreciate your input. It won't be under consideration today, but this is something that we do plan on taking up again before the election.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mrs. Jarman. And just to clarify, we do actually give the person the opportunity, as we all remember, even ourselves on election day here in this room. Remember you saying, Mr. Shank, hurry up, call these people back. I mean, after you voted on that. So Tanya and the office, again, kudos to them for reaching out to these individuals, letting you know you missed your signature or you missed your date. But don't forget, you have until 8 p.m. election night to come in and fix that. And we do presently do that. A lot of people don't come, and that is their prerogative. But I talked to many and that would come in and go, thank you, thank you, thank you. My mistake, I was in a hurry, that type of thing. But as we all learned on election day, when we had those impromptu meetings to go ahead and quickly cure these ballots, so that we can call the person and say, please, you're welcome to come in. We plan on doing that again, of course, on election day as well, making sure we're giving them plenty of time to hurry up and come in before 8 p.m. and fix that ballot.
Right, and just to
Fix that envelope, I should say, excuse me, properly.
And just to reiterate, the idea of formalizing that process will be taken up at the next meeting before the election. So again, thank you to everyone for your input. Are there any other questions or comments from the board members? Seeing and hearing none, I will accept a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
This meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you all for your participation.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
too.
Terry, I know you have to scoot, so I'll have you sign these first real quick.
What, watch you today or something?
Oh, he's EMI tour. He's heading over. All right, so here we're just signing right to the line, anywhere on there. Yeah, any line. The other two are there. I'll text Tina, no,